simple HTML tags. So for this, we're just going to use an H1. So we're going to just say we're creating an H1 element. And here we take an object that will have the different properties that we want on that H1 element. And then the third property is any children that the H1 element will have. So for this case, the H1 element always has like a child of just text. So what we can do here is we can say, hello world. So what this is going to do is this is going to actually create an H1 element with no other properties on it because we're just passing in an empty object. You can also pass in null here. It's kind of the same thing in this case. And then we're passing in the child text of hello world. So then to actually get this on the screen, you'll notice that we have this div here that just has an ID of root. So then what we do here is we actually do React DOM. So this is the other library that you'll need to include with React. So React and React DOM are the two essential libraries that you'll be using with React. The React library is what you'll be using to kind of build all of your components, and React DOM is what you're using to actually render it to the DOM, to the actual page. So on that, we just call React DOM.render, if I can spell. And then, so here is where it kind of gets kind of awesome, actually. So we then just say React.create element again. And so here, instead of passing in an H1, we actually just pass in our hello message class that we created. And then we're not passing it any parameters yet or any props. So we leave that, and then it doesn't have any children, so we can actually just leave that third argument off. And then outside of here, so we'd say what our root element that we're creating is, which is our hello message element that we just created above. And then we need to tell React, or React DOM rather, where to actually render that. And so there we just say document.get element by ID, and then the ID that we have set up, which is root. So we go ahead and save that, and then we should be able to actually go into our browser and go directly to that. Let's see. Oops. Sometimes I really hate the Mac shortcuts. Don't save. I don't know why that brought my email up. Okay, here we go. Let's see. Oh, I think I mistyped that, didn't I? Extends, not extend. I swear, you get up in front of people and your IQ drops like 20 points. I don't know what it is. Never happened. All right, so hello world. There we go. Yay, it's there. So this is what we kind of consider like just kind of a static component. It just kind of just renders things and doesn't really have any data in it. There's no props or anything. Like there's just nothing really there. So to get this a little bit more interesting, what we can do is we can actually then say, so every component you create will have a props, Mike? Okay, sorry. Move it closer? Okay. Yeah, okay. I just talk loud normally, so. Okay, so where was I? I lost my train of thought. Okay, so every React component that you create is going to actually have a props object on it. So you can actually reference that in your component, and then you use that props object to pass things into it. So here we can say, let's see, We can actually turn this into a template string because we're using ES6 and we're cool like that. And so to do that, I just use the backtick instead of a single quote. And then we can do something with a $sign and then open close brackets. And so then we say this.props, and we're going to give it a name. So we're going to pass in a name. So instead of saying hello world, we're going to actually say hello, whatever we want our name to be. So then, as you notice here, in this hello message, we're passing in a empty object. Well, now we want the property of name. And we want to say that is Jack. So then if we come over here and redo this, now it's hello Jack. So we've successfully passed in actual data to it. And we're able to have that be something other than just static text. We're able to actually give it a different property. Okay, so at this point, I kind of want to show doing the same thing, but with using JSX. So as you can see, this is kind of like a lot of code to actually do this. Like there are some shortcuts you can do here. Like since this breaks down to just an H1 element, you could actually just say react.dom.h1, and then since it knows it's an H1, then you just have to do this. So you can leave that out, and that kind of cleans it up a little bit. But I mean, you still have to have this react.create element down here. The real trouble that you get into is when you start nesting things, and we'll get into that a little bit. But one of the big things to remember is that in React, when you make a component, everything has to kind of tie back down to a root component or a root element within your component. Meaning, I can't have an H1 and like a P tag that are on the same level in terms of, and then they're not within something. And what I mean by that is they have to be like in a div container of some sort. So normally what you'll see things do here is you'll see like, you'll see things where it's like a div, and then they'll have, and that's just to kind of contain everything at one level. And then there's a bunch of children to that where it's like you have an H1, you have a text field, whatever you want to have in there. And so kind of the big thing there is when you get into that nesting, you kind of fall into this like nesting hell when you're doing things this way. Because, well, in our platform at work that we've been working on, we actually don't support JSX yet. So I've been trying to get the platform team to start working on it, and it just keeps getting pushed back because I think I'm the only one on our team that actually uses React. So it usually gets deprioritized. So I have to work in this like nesting hell structure all the time. So I've gotten pretty good at it, but I don't know, part of me dies every time I have to do it. So I kind of want to just dive into JSX and kind of give you a gentle introduction into that, and then we'll kind of go from there. So as I said, JSX, when you first see it, you're going to be like, this is really strange. I don't feel comfortable with this. It just feels weird. I feel like I'm doing something wrong. And it is strange, but trust me, there's a really great article by the guys that created, I think it's Ruby on Rails. They have a really great blog called Signal versus Noise, and they have this article that actually goes in that it's basically about giving it 5 minutes. As developers, we tend to gain opinions over the course of the years that we work in our technologies and we gain our different opinions, and we start to formulate those opinions and try and push those opinions on other people. And so then when we hear something different, we get like some new information, we have a tendency to reject it at first. And so it's good to just give it 5 minutes. Don't be reactive, which is kind of funny since I'm talking about React. But to take 5 minutes to just think about it, and you'll start to see the merits in some of other people's opinions. So when I just took 5 minutes and just made myself start using JSX, I just instantly fell in love with it. So what does JSX stand for? Well, there's no real there's a few different definitions. Like if you look up like what does JSX stand for, you'll get like 3 or 4 different definitions. 2 that I really like are JavaScript XML, and that will become pretty apparent here pretty soon, and JavaScript extended. So JSX is a syntax extension on JavaScript. It's used to describe what our UI elements are going to be, what they should look like. A good way to think of it is think of it as like a template language, but it has the full power of JavaScript available to you. And as I've shown here, it is completely optional, but I highly recommend you get used to working in it if you want to really start diving in and using React in a lot of your applications. I highly recommend that you just get used to using JSX. Okay, so luckily most of this really kind of stays the same. The thing that really changes is this here. So instead of making this call here, we're actually going to put up some parentheses, and I do this just because this helps my code become more readable. You don't really have to do this, but you would have to make sure that everything starts on the first line, and then it gets kind of confusing after that because you can still go down to the next line, but then the nesting seems off and it's a little harder to read. So I always do return and then open, close, parentheses, semicolon, and then I go from there. So since we have Babel on here, we can just start using JSX. There's no build system that we really have to do since we're just playing around with it. And in future lessons, we'll get into actually setting up a build system for this so that you don't have to have everything contained in one file. And you can actually compose everything and set everything into their own files and maintain it that way. But for right now, just for demonstration purposes, we're just doing everything in this one file. So JSX is, like I said, it's JavaScript XML, or really it's basically HTML in your JavaScript. You know, it's like Reese's. You know, you get peanut butter in your chocolate. Now you're getting HTML in your JavaScript, and it's going to look weird, but just trust me. So if you know HTML, you just start writing HTML. So you say you have your H1 tag here, and then we want to say hello. And then instead of doing this like template string stuff, because this isn't a template string, it's not a string at all, it's just an extension on JavaScript. So we don't need to do it this way. You just do an open close parentheses, or brackets, not parentheses. And then you just do the same thing, this dot props dot name. Oh. I know. It's gonna feel weird. It's gonna feel weird, but the power that it gives you is just absolutely amazing. And it may not be apparent today. You may go home with like this weird pit in your stomach, and you may be like, that Jack guy has no idea what he's talking about. This is dumb, and I don't like it. But as we go throughout the course, it'll start to become apparent to you just how powerful, just how much power that JSX actually lends to you. So we have just hello, this dot props dot name, and then we can just put our exclamation point there. And then here, instead of doing this react.createElement, hello message, name, Jack, we can actually just do, let me highlight all this. We can get rid of that. We don't need to call that anymore. We simply just do open angle brackets, and we called it hello message, and then closing angle bracket like that. So it's just, you basically create your own HTML tag. Like that's essentially what it boils down to. Now this one isn't very interesting because it really just boils down to an H1 element, and it's like, okay, that's not really that impressive. But one cool thing is, like, instead of passing in this object, since we know we want a props.name, you're creating custom properties on this element as well. So we have name equals Jack. And so it's exactly like you would have it in HTML. Like if you had up here in the body, H1, and then like like say it supported a property, well, I guess H1s, I don't know. So say we had a property jack on there like that, but it's essentially allowing you to do something similar to that, but you're doing it with JavaScript, so you still have the full power of JavaScript to be able to manipulate your data and then pass it to your view. So if we save this and then go back, everything should still look the same. And it does, yay. So that's kind of just an intro into JSX. So I want to kind of keep using that just to kind of get you more familiar with it and kind of keep using it. So that, because kind of from here on out, we're going to be using JSX. If you really want to take the time to kind of go through this and translate it to doing things with like the API calls that React has, you can. I don't really recommend it just because of the nesting hell that you can really easily fall into. But yeah, so say for the hello message, I want to say hello, but then I want to have something like maybe just a p tag that just says, welcome to my awesome app. So what's cool is like I just edited it there, and now it's just a part of this component. So I've made a component using H1 and a p tag. Awesome. Now this won't work, and I'll show you why. So if we redo this, nothing renders. If we open up our error log, you'll see here, can I make this bigger? Yes, sweet. Okay, so there's an error with the Babel script, and this is an error that React is giving back to us. And it says, adjacent JSX elements must be wrapped in an enclosing tag. So this gets back to what I was saying before. You can't have two elements side by side that aren't contained within something else. So when you start to get into more complex components, you'll probably start, like you'll see a lot of like components that are out there in the wild right now. Pretty much everything kind of boils down to a div that is a container, and it's simply there just to wrap everything around. And so now you have a div, and then hello, this .props name, welcome to my awesome app, div, closing tag. So now if we go back over here and refresh this, we have hello Jack, welcome to my awesome app. We also have the power to give classes to these things, and what I mean by that are like CSS classes. But we can't just say class equals whatever our name is. So we can't just say class equals hello message. This won't work because remember, we're working, even though this is JSX, it still is JavaScript. It's an extension to JavaScript, and class is a registered keyword in JavaScript, so we can't do that. So the key thing to remember is whenever you're setting a class on one of your React elements, you do class name. So we have class name, hello message. We can save that, go back in here, everything's gonna look the same. But if we actually inspect our app, you can see that we have this class hello message. Okay. And then if we wanted to, like in our header up here, we could add like a style tag real quick. And then we could say hello dash message. I want the color to be my favorite shade of pink, deep pink. There we go. And there we are. So there you go. So this is really kind of like, this is really just kind of skimming the surface on what we can do. The key thing to remember is that you're basically writing HTML to describe your UI components. Like it really is just boiling down to the HTML of your app. But you're able to do it in such a way that you still have access to JavaScript. So you're still able to put things into your, like you're still able to pull in data and you can manipulate that data in any way that you want. So like on this, you can still call, like, I could still call like two lowercase? I haven't done that in a while. But I can still call that and refresh, and now it's hello Jack. So you can manipulate the data that's coming in. You can do things on that. Are there any questions so far? Anything about that? Does anybody feel like, I don't know about this HTML in my JavaScript? Yeah. So one of the beauties of doing it this way is just the fact that you're kind of able to kind of keep everything in the same context that you're thinking in. You're able to kind of keep everything contained in, like you're working in one file when it comes down to it. Because at the end of the day, your root HTML file is really just going to be something that is pulling in the React libraries that you need, and then it has a div root, or a div with an ID of something that you want to call it. Most people use root. Some people use app. I use whatever. Like it's kind of like whatever I'm feeling like that day. But there's no real like you'll usually see root or app is what I've usually seen. But like that's really what it boils down to. You just have that, and then all of your actual HTML that you're writing to do all this is in all these files. And what's really cool is that it makes it easier to work with someone who is more of a front-end person, where they know HTML and they know CSS. They don't really know anything about JavaScript, maybe. Like talking like from a design sense, like they know how to structure their HTML. They may not really know too much about JavaScript. They may know enough to get around. But you can hand them this file, and then they start to feel right at home. They're like, oh, it's HTML right there. I can just do whatever I want. Oh, I just have to remember that I have to say it's a class name instead of a class. Okay, that's, I'll make that mistake a few times, and then I'll finally get it and realize, oh, I need to use class name. And by the way, I still make that mistake all the time. I still put class, and what's great is React will let you know. It has really good error checking, where if something, like if you make a change and it's not rendering, open up your console, React will probably tell you exactly what's going on with it. If you're using the full, like if you notice here, we're not doing react.min.js. If you do react.min.js, it'll usually give you like a URL that leads to a page that will give you more explanation of what the error was. And then usually kind of tell you like, hey, if you're getting these errors, that's probably meaning that you're actually in dev mode. So you really shouldn't be using min.js. You should be using the full thing. That way you can just have the errors in your console. But those are just kind of little quirks that you can, like if you're like, why is my error not like really giving me any info? Why do I have to keep going to this? It probably means that you're using react.min or react.dom.min, which is the minified version of the file. So yeah, let's see. So this is just kind of a gentle, like what I wanted to do today was really just kind of get our toes in the water and just kind of show some of the weird aspects of it. So there's not a whole lot more that I really had in my notes to really show. And I think I talked a lot faster, but if anyone has any questions, just let me know. And then if you don't mind, does anyone mind if we kind of go on like a little detour and kind of play around with this and kind of see what we can do, like creating like a form or anything like that? You have a question?
Yeah, I did have a question.
Yeah.
So hard coded in the main equals there, does that usually come in like a JSON object?
Yeah, so what you'll see later, and like what we'll do, like what I do in like at work, like usually I'm getting my data from like a MySQL database, and I pull that in, and then that like gives me like an array of like all my results, and then I can actually build like an object out of that and then pass that in. So like what you'll usually see you'll usually see things like you'll have something. Now this is kind of weird to show like in this format, because this is really kind of meant to be playing with something, but we'll definitely get into it where, because the app we'll be building throughout the course is like a blog application, and you don't want to like be hard coding all of your blog posts into your file. You want to be storing them on like a database, pulling that information out, and then just being like, okay, here's what my title is, here's my actual posting, here's the author, here's the date that I published it, and then it'll be like, great, I know what to do with all that stuff. Here we go. So this is kind of like a rough way to just show that you could just have data coming in. So we could have like let data equals an object, and that has like a name property. And like say instead of just hard coding the data here to an object, we're actually doing like an API call to go get something that we knew returned an object that had a name property on it. And we could say the name is, I don't know, Jerry. And then so instead of having name equals that, we would then do the curly braces, and it's in our data object, so we'd say data.name. So then if I go over here and refresh, it should say hello Jerry. There we are. So we will dive more into that. We'll dive deeper into that, where we're actually going to be pulling our data from like a database, and then we'll be passing it to our React components. So we won't be hard coding everything. I was just kind of taking that route today, just to kind of. Yeah, so like you can have it come in as like an object, or like it kind of depends on what the API is giving you. Like I'll have things where like I'll be hitting an API and it gives it to me in like a JSON object, or it'll give it to me in JSON that's actually like in an array, and like I have to kind of manipulate that a little bit. You kind of have to massage it in, and then once you get it the way you want it to, then you just pass the elements that you need into that. And then like sometimes you'll even see things where they don't even say like data.name. They'll just be like, I've got data here and it's like an array, and I know it's an array or whatever, and they'll just say, instead of passing in a name, I'm just going to give you a data property, and that's just going to equal whatever my data object is. And then within your component, you know that I have a data object, and then you could say like this.props.data.name, and it would work like that. So this .props.data, that's coming from whenever you name this here. So if I name this Hello Kitty, and then do this.props Hello Kitty, like those have to match for that. I don't know why I chose Hello Kitty. I don't know why my brain went there, but it did. So.
But your backend won't be that props. That's just for your React DOM.
I'm sorry?
That keyword props there. Like that's just for your React DOM. Your backend server does.
Right. So this is this.props is a reference to the properties that you're passing into your React component. So it's something internal to React. It's not something that you have to maintain outside of that. So I'd also like to kind of show some like text inputs, because those can be a little weird as well. So if we say we have an input, and we want to say the type is just text. Text. That's totally possible. The weird thing to remember is in HTML, like this is completely legal. You can just say, I have an input tag, and I just close it. I don't need like a closing like slash angle bracket. Like I don't need to do that. In React, you have to do that. You have to close all your tags. Everything needs to be closing. So you want to make sure that you're adding that on there. You'll start to find that the more you work in React, the more you'll actually start doing this in HTML, just because you're required to do it in React. So whenever you just write regular HTML, you'll find yourself doing that, and which doesn't hurt anything. So, here we're just adding an input of type text. So we just save that, and then we can reload the page, and then we have a text box here now, and we can type in it. But there does come like a weird, there are some caveats with using inputs, and that comes when you start to set values on them. So if I want to say my value here, like say I'm asking them to, like say this is like a registration form or something like that, and I want them to put in their first name. So, but say, let's see, that's not a really good example. Let's say we have something where we're pulling in information and we can pre-populate a field with that data, and so we know what the value is going to be. But we want them to be able to change it, but we're kind of trying to be smart, and we're trying to guess like, well, we're asking for this information, we got this data, this is what we're thinking it is based on the data you sent us. So we want to say, we just want to put in like this .props.data.name, since I'm keeping everything in data. And I'm going to get rid of this lowercase thing. So that should then put the value Jerry into that text box. So if we refresh, we have Jerry in there. And if I do this right, yeah, I'm hitting backspace and I can't change it, and I can't type in it anymore. Like I can't change anything. And that's because when you set the actual value, you're basically telling React, like, this is the value that I want this to be. And you're just, if you don't put anything else in there, you're basically saying, like, this is what we're assuming the value is going to be, and it's not going to change. In order to actually have this change, we then have to start going into kind of like the event system that React provides for us. So that would just be, like, if you're familiar with HTML, there's like an on change, I believe. Well, in React, it's the same thing. It's just camel case, so it's on change with a capital C. And then we can set this equal to a function. So we can then put this in parentheses, or in, I keep saying parentheses, in brackets, HandleChange. So this is essentially like a callback function that, like, whenever the text gets like a change event, we want to call this function, which we're calling HandleChange. So then in our hello message class, we would have a HandleChange function. So what we want to do, let's see, kind of thinking. All right. So with onChange, we also, or with inputs, we want a way to actually reference the input so that HandleChange knows what to, knows which text box we're talking about. Like, the thing with React, you kind of have to make sure that you're letting it know what element you're actually referring to. So when it comes to that, we actually have a React built-in property called ref, which stands for reference. And we can just say that this is like first name. So we give it a reference of first name. So then we do onChange equals HandleChange. Let's see. Try and remember if. Let's see. This is where I'm going unscripted, trying to remember everything. So this dot. Actually, you know what? It's probably a good time to kind of show some of the documentation that JavaScript or that React provides us. So let's do that. By the way, I always have to look up the documentation. I can never remember all this stuff in my head. Like, I always have to look everything up, so. And I'll post the URL to the actual React documentation. Basically, if you search React.js, it should be like the very first result. But it's like Facebook, what is it? Facebook.github.io/React, and then you can go into the docs. So there's a thing where it comes with, let's see, I think it's this forms element. Oh, I didn't need to do the ref thing at all. Cool. Okay, that makes this a lot easier. I was doing this the wrong way. Okay. So I don't actually need this reference here at all, but I do need to have this .HandleChange. So it's saying use the HandleChange method that's actually tied to this class. And then what we're getting into here is we're having like a stateful component. So we're having a component that actually manages its state. So the state of the name is what we're putting into the input. So what we want to do here is now we want to have a constructor that takes in props. So this is the same props as this .props. And then we want to call super with the props there. So we're just calling, what super is it's taking the React.component class and it's passing in the props that we're giving it up to that and calling that on the component, and then we can start doing everything. So you always want to call super. Like that'll be another thing that you'll probably forget to do. You'll forget to put the super with the props in there. But again, React is really good at letting you know when you do things wrong. Like it'll yell at you and say, hey, you can't call super on a constructor. And actually, I think that's a JavaScript thing where JavaScript is actually yelling at you for doing that, not React. So a component has this notion of props that we've already seen, but it also has this notion of state. So props are never intended to change. You never want to set, like within your component, this .props, like in our case, we never want to say this .props.data.name equals something. We never want to override that. The props are meant to be something that we're passing in. The way we handle changes to that is through the concept of state. So we just say this .state equals, and then we set it to an object. And then in state, say we just want to say it's actually called first name. And we want to initialize the first name with, let's see, since we have props, we don't need to do this .props. We can just say props, and then data.name. So that is how we initialize our state. So the constructor gets run when the, upon rendering of the component. So this is where the super is called, and then we initialize our state here. Yep.
Is constructor a keyword in React?
It's a keyword in JavaScript. Yeah. Yeah, so it comes from, it's essentially where it came in with like the class syntax with ES6. So a constructor is where you're kind of initializing your object, like you're initializing values on your object. Yeah, it's very similar to things like Java and C#. Like those of you that have some C# or Java experience, if you start using like the class notation that JavaScript has, you may start to feel a little at home, especially if you're kind of uneasy with the whole prototype notation stuff. Where you call like you have the name of your actual object .prototype .whatever and it equals this function or something like that. That's all happening here in the background. Like this is kind of an aside for like ES6 that we're getting into, but that's all happening here. It's just kind of wrapping that around this class syntax, or it's the class syntax is being wrapped around that essentially. So in the background, it's really kind of compiling to, this prototype stuff, and it's doing that stuff in the background, but it allows you to kind of more easily set it up, especially if you come from a background in things like Java and C#, or really pretty much any other object-oriented language. Now, there are arguments for not using this, and a lot of them I completely agree with. Is anybody familiar with the gorilla and the banana problem? Okay, awesome. I get to tell this story. Yay. So one of the big problems with object orientation, especially when you're doing things with like classes and like everything has to be an object and everything's a class, you'll ask for a banana. Like you have a banana object and you'll ask for a banana like in your code, like I need a banana. But because of the way the class structure is set up, you'll often get the banana, but you'll get the gorilla holding the banana, and you'll get the jungle that the gorilla is in. So you'll get like everything all at once. And so having the prototype structure set up allows you to kind of get around that to where like when you want the banana, you're really just getting the banana. So I'm so happy I got to tell that story. Yay. So, but yeah, so essentially the main reason though that I like to use class when I'm working with React, all the documentation that you'll find from like the official stuff with Facebook is going to be using this because they're trying to push this class notation. Like they're really supporting this, and so I think it was last year sometime they completely redid all their documentation to be in this class structure syntax. And like I was lost for about a week, and then I started using it, and I was like, okay, I kind of get it. I don't use it a whole lot outside of React, just because of the problems that kind of ensue with using a class-oriented structure. Like for instance, I think there's a quote that like if you always rely on creating classes, you would never be able to make the game Clue, because a wrench can be a weapon or a tool, you know, so, but then you get into the like, well, it can inherit from both and that sort of thing, so, but anyway, that's neither here nor there. But the main reason that I chose to use class was mainly kind of to kind of help you guys out, like as you kind of dive into it and you start looking at the documentation, you'll be seeing this a lot. And so I didn't want you to go in and be like, you know, this isn't how he had it set up. How do I translate this to what he had? So I figured I would just stick with that because that's what you're going to see in the official documentation. But yeah, so Constructor is something from ES6. And then the props that are being handed into it, it's React knows like, oh, we're passing in these props. And then like the props come in from here, and so this is basically just being passed into this component, and it's running the constructor when it initializes. So like all your initialization code is going to go in your constructor. So what we're doing here, to get back to what we're doing, we're setting the state, and we're saying this component has a state of first name. And we're initializing it to props.data.name, the data that we're passing in. So what this allows us to do, since we've initialized it here, we can actually replace these calls here with this .state.name, our first name. And this .state.firstName. So I believe I should be able to refresh this. Yeah, everything's the same. And just to show that that is still working, we can say Tom. Yeah, so everything's still working. So now what we're doing is we're no longer relying on props to be where we're getting the information. We're using props to initialize our state, and then we're using the state to get all our information for our component. So then if I go back, I need to double check this again. Yeah, so what I'm doing here, let's see if I can blow this up a little bit. What I'm doing here is I'm saying, okay, so we have input, type text, we've set the value, and we've initialized it to the state, and then we have onChange, this .HandleChange. So that's going to be referencing this HandleChange event. So event is the actual change event that's being fired off. So then we do this .SetState, and then we pass in an object. So let's actually just do that in code right now. So we have HandleChange here, and then we have event. And you don't have to call it event, you can call it E. I usually type it out as event, just so when I come back to it 6 months later, I remember, oh yeah, that's an event that's being passed down. So then we do, this .SetState. So this is another thing you won't ever want to do, like you only want to do this .state equals something in your constructor. You don't want to do this again like anywhere else in your code, because this is where you're actually initializing it. If you need to change your state for anything, then you want to call this .SetState. And so this .SetState takes an object, and then we just say first name, because that's what we have there. And, well, hang on, I'm getting ahead of myself. So first name, and then we want to set it to the event.target.value, I think it is. Yeah. So the event that's being passed in is basically an onChange event. That onChange event has a target, which is the input that we've set up, and then we're grabbing the value out of that input and setting it to the first name property on our state. So I think, oh, and there's one more thing I have to do. This is kind of a weird thing, and I always forget to do it. I've been trying to get into a better habit of remembering to do it. But we'll need to do, in the constructor, we'll need to do this .HandleChange equals this .HandleChange.bind this, is that right? Yeah. So what this is doing is we're actually binding the context of this, like, so this is referring to the component itself. We're binding that context to the HandleChange method that we have. Essentially, any method that you have in React that's a custom method that you're creating. So HandleChange isn't something that's built into React. It's something that we had to create so that we could handle our change event on our input. But anytime you're doing that, and within that method you need to call this, meaning I need to grab something that is tied to this component, then you need to have this line up here in your constructor that is basically just saying this .HandleChange. So we're basically setting the context for the method to the context of the component itself, right? So it allows us to actually, like if we didn't have this here, if we weren't binding this, then it wouldn't know what this is referring to. It would say, you know, can't call like set state on undefined, like this isn't defined. So we have to do the binding here. But yeah. So I believe that was the last thing we had to do there for that. So we should be able to go in here and refresh. Let's see. Yay. So you notice, not only is it allowing me to finally change what's in my text box, let me blow that up a bit. Yeah. So we're not only changing what's in the text box, we're actually changing what's in the header itself, or the header, the H1 tag. And so anything we type here is going to show up there. Yay.
Show us how to do two-way binding.
Maybe. Yeah. No, I knew that that was going to change that because of the state. So that is because we changed the this.state here, and we changed it here as well. So if I went back and said this.props, what is it? This.props.data.name. If I do that, then that will be Tom, and that is initialized to Tom. But as we change that, it doesn't change the other. So. But yeah, so you can have things where as you're changing state, you will be able to have that change in the actual component wherever. So like if you usually use props to initialize your state, and if you want that property to be used in somewhere in your component, and you always want it to be at that initial value, then you want to make sure that you're calling this.props, okay? If you want it to be able to change with the state, then you want to be using this.state. Another thing that comes with using state is generally, and we'll get more into this as we go, but what's really powerful with React is say I have a custom component that I've made called like blog post. And I want to pass in, like let's say we have state of title, title, and it's my blog post, or it's props.data.title. I'm not actually going to put all this in there, but I'm just using this for an example. So then we want to say title equals this.state.title. So what we could do is blog post. So this kind of demonstrates a couple of things. Like I may have just thrown a lot at you here, but this demonstrates a couple of things. One is that whenever you create a custom component, you can then use that anywhere in your React code as if it's just a normal as if it's just a normal HTML tag. Like you've essentially created an HTML element, and you can use it wherever you want as long as it's within your React app. Like I wouldn't be able to use that outside of it because it'd be Chrome would be like, what is this? I don't know what blog post is. So that's one thing that I kind of threw at you. Another thing is that, and this is what I was really wanting to kind of showcase, is that so blog post is now considered a child component of hello message. Even though it doesn't exist because we didn't write it or anything. In this context here, if it was all, like if all this code was here and was working, then the blog post would be a child of hello message. So you'll notice that we passed in the state instead of the props. So one thing that there's a reason that we did that, and that is generally your parent components, like you're gonna, everything's going to boil down to like one single parent component generally in your app. Like you'll see a lot of times like people will set up like just an app component, and that's kind of like the root component that then has everything else, like all their other custom components in it. But you'll notice that like the app component itself manages all the state, and then it passes all of those changes that happen to the state down to the children. The children can then manipulate that, and then they'll essentially then go back up to the parent and say, hey, just so you know, you passed this to me, I made a change to it, here you go. And then it's like, okay, great, thanks for letting me know about that. And then it's able to update its state. So it keeps everything in sync. You can technically manage your state within all these children components, but you'll start to run into these really messy things where stuff starts to fall out of sync, and you'll just wonder why, like, hey, I changed this, but it's not filtering down to all my other components, or it's not going back up, like everything just seems broken. And the number one cause you'll see for that, like you'll go on Stack Overflow and be like, what's going on? Generally they'll say, well, it's because you're handling your state in all these different places. You really just want one place that is kind of the source of truth that we call. That's a term you'll see quite a lot. Like, you want one place to be the owner of the state, and that's generally the parent. Sometimes there's some cases for doing other things, like if you're trying to do this really complex thing and it doesn't really make sense for the parent to really know about this state, but it makes sense for the component to know. But even then, it's like, if that component then has children, those children shouldn't be using the state. So it's basically, it kind of boils down to, like, you have a root parent component that will generally know most of the state of your app, and then the children that need to have their own contained state, they should only be letting their children know about it. They shouldn't be passing that back up to the parent, that sort of thing. So it gets kind of crazy. There is a lot of documentation, and we will dive into it a little bit throughout this course. But yeah, so that's just kind of a really brief introduction into state. The main thing I wanted to touch on with state is that we have to basically use state that if we want to have an initialized value. And generally, like, say this was just a form and we want to initialize the state, initialize the state of the first name to just an empty string. Because we still want to do something with that state, you still need to have it set up like this, because you want to set the value to just an empty string. And this is really kind of the way to set all this up. Like, if we didn't have a value here, it would just be set to an empty string. But it's kind of harder to work with in terms of, like, okay, when the value changes, what do I do with that value? This really sets it up to say, well, when it changes, we're going to be doing something with it. And in this case, we're just setting the state of it. So yeah.
So that, is that where like Redux comes into play, like managing that? That happens a lot in me. Track so many sub-uses track where the data originates from.
Yeah.
So like create a video slider.
Yeah, so Redux is, let's see, it's based on, like, you'll see Flux thrown around a lot. Flux is, if I remember correctly, Flux is essentially Facebook's, it's like their interface, like their implementation details of how to, like, have like a state manager for a React app. Like, it's not really like a library in and of itself, if I remember correctly. There are things that implement it. Like, it's essentially like describing, here's what you should do, and then, like, Redux is like an implementation of that philosophy, and it's probably the most popular one. And you'll see it throughout this course. Like, we'll get into that, just because it allows you to really manage your state and help you from shooting yourself in the foot quite a bit. So, but yeah, any other questions? No? Okay, well, that is all that I really had prepared for today. So we're done a little bit early. So if you want to kind of mingle, and if anyone has like some free code camp courses to be working on or anything like that, I'll be around here till 4, because that's what we have the place for. So again, big thank you to Starspace for letting us have this awesome space to be able to meet. And yeah, so all right, that's all I have. Yeah.